Surprised with the fun insights, I hope. My name is Alexis Day. I'm also with SPARC. That's the acronym handily on the screen there, supporting pastoralism and agriculture in recurrent and protracted crises. We work here in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel as well. Today, I'm happy to leave you in wonderful hands. We have a wonderful panel of experts here. Tahira Sharif will be our facilitator today and guiding this conversation with an excellent set of experts that we have, and you will learn more about who they are. But to open, I would love to sing Tahira's praises and then hand it over to her to steer us through the session. So Tahira is currently a postdoctoral fellow, hard to say, forgive me, postdoc, I'll use the acronym, at the International Livestock Research Institute, which is ILRI, another acronym, well known for a lot of her work, particularly on the moral economy. Pastries is another acronym that I'll throw in there that some of you might be familiar with. It's called the Pastoralism, Resilience and Uncertainty Program. It used to be under IDS, and that's closed. That's where some of her PhD work is featured. She's a social anthropologist and development expert with over a decade of experience, particularly in northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia. So all of these folks have a lot of wealth of experience on the drylands, which is why we're gathered here today. And we're going to talk a lot more about the context of climate information services in these particular contexts. And now I'll hand over to Tahira to start to introduce the rest of our guests. Enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this session on climate information services in the drylands. I'm going to facilitate this session, and I would like to begin by introducing my panelists, but then I'll have their bios on the screen, and then I'll give the mic to them so that they can say briefly about what they're doing and where they're working.
Thank you, Tahira, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahma Hassan. I can't see what I said that I'm doing, but I'll just tell you. I am also engaging in a postdoc as a researcher. So I'm a socioeconomic researcher generally, currently with the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, and locally we are with the Center for Research and Development in the Drylands, a locally embedded NGO based in Marsabit. So we are doing cross-border work across the region. That is Marsabit and southern Ethiopia. So looking at pastoralism in general, resilience program, local constructs of resilience, and humanitarian action in these areas. And this involves early warning and anticipatory action. So I hope to engage with you in the next hour. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Samuel, who will also introduce himself.
Thank you so much. I'm Samuel Odhiambo, Director Meteorological Services in charge of Garissa County. Basically, we are working on climate information. We are talking of the system and also the services. You cannot work on services without the system. And I've been there for almost 13 years now, though I am not owning camels. So generally, we are issuing climate information to pastoralists based on their needs, and also to small-scale farmers based on their needs. I'll not go through the entire write-up, but that is basically the summary. Thank you.
Yeah, over to Claire.
Hi, good afternoon or evening, everybody. My name's Claire Bedelian. I'm working with Mercy Corps on the SPARC project. I'm a researcher who works a lot in the drylands. I've worked a lot on issues to do with pastoralism, livestock systems, water and rangeland governance. With the SPARC program, I've been involved in the innovation component, where we've been looking at climate information services for pastoralists and also looking at governance in innovations, for example, trying to integrate more participatory planning approaches into formal governance. Thank you.
Excellent. Now that you know who our panelists are, I would like to begin with Claire asking her, drawing on the recent publication for SPARC on climate information service for pastoralists. Claire, could you please tell us what types of climate service information do pastoral tell us they need? Because most of the time, we assume we know what climate service information they need. But then, drawing on your research, what do they tell us that they need?
Okay, thank you. Maybe just to start, I'll just frame the study and why we wanted to do it. We wanted to look at the specific context of pastoralist information services and look at their needs and priorities. So there's a lot of focus on the farmer needs. So we specifically looked at the pastoralists, and we saw that despite increasing availability of climate information and improved forecasting, there was still low uptake and also low demand by pastoralists. And we wanted to ask why was this the case? So why are they not using it, and how can we make it more relevant to their needs and priorities? So we looked at the specific needs of pastoralists. We looked at how to tailor and deliver it to pastoralists. So I think for pastoralists, climate and weather information needs to align with their specific timescales and decision making. So these may be, for example, the short-term forecasts where they want to make decisions on immediate decisions on grazing locations, where to move their animals, perhaps responding to immediate weather shocks such as storms. And then also the seasonal forecasts are very important for pastoralist decision making. So there they perhaps need to plan their seasonal grazing. They need to know when the onset of the rains is, whether there's going to be a drought, and they need to store fodder or plan their water use. So the seasonal forecasts are super important for pastoralists. The study showed us that what pastoralists really ask for is the downscaled, localized, context-specific information. So this kind of information that's relevant to their specific livelihoods and locations. So within pastoralism, thinking about the varying roles that people have, so not lumping it all together and thinking whether they need to know more about crops or more about livestock, are there gender differentiated needs? So there was a diversity of needs within the pastoral and agro-pastoral context. And they also said that they want to have agro-meteorological advisories that accompany the forecasts. So, for example, these help them make decisions and use those forecasts for practical recommendations. And these needed to be specific to their livelihood priorities and needs. So not having blanket recommendations, but ones that are downscaled to the context, to their specific location, and their roles and priorities. So this was something that needed to be done in a co-produced, co-developed way, perhaps through some localized scenario planning, rather than them being externally produced. And the other thing that was important for their needs was that it wasn't always individual needs. It was more looking at collective decision making and collective action, because that's important as well in how pastoralists decide to move with their animals or use water, harvest water, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. I just want to brief you that once we have the first response from the panelists, then we'll open the floor for question and answer. So please note down your questions and even comments. Then we'll have it conversationary mode. Thank you so much, Claire, for that. There is this saying whereby even rodents prepare and anticipate for crisis. So sometimes they carry nuts with them, knowing that there is a crisis. So, and pastoralists, having lived with different forms of crisis, they usually anticipate and prepare, drawing on different forms of knowledge. And now this takes me to Rahma, who has recently worked in the Dryland, especially on anticipatory action and the humanitarian response to this crisis. So Rahma, what are some of the barriers limiting pastoralist access and utilization of climate information, especially now that we've heard from Claire what they need? So what limits their access and utilization of this climate information? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tahira. I would like to make a few remarks about what the type of research we're engaging in and the framing within which we enter into this space, bearing in mind that the work on early warning systems in these areas have been done over time. And just to say forthright, like working in uncertain contexts requires another set of rules and frame for us to be able to engage with pastoralists either in early warning, whether it's humanitarian action or even anticipatory action. So the framing here, I mean, how do we understand the shocks and crises? Or how do we even understand the climate information, as Claire is indicating here? So if our effort in pastoral areas is to plan for precise actions, because everybody is thinking about a precise set of information passed over so that there's a precise set of actions, and then we will be able to stop the crisis, have less catastrophes. But what happens when we are engaging in an uncertain environment? And what happens when we are in a context that is completely different on this set of rules that we have long learned on how to engage with climate information? So, for example, how does the collective approach among pastoralists engage with climate information systems? People make decisions collectively. Climate information is targeting households. Households that are sets of the units within which people would want to make decisions. How do we handle the disconnects between what we have long known as the efforts and the set of information required with the local realities? So from our recent desk studies, which are available on the Feinstein International Center website, on how pastoralists engage with early warning, how the state engages with climate information, and how humanitarians themselves and other actors engage with this, we find these broad disconnects on the framing and the way we engage with the drylands that inhibits even the interventions or the sorts of information that we are able to provide. The other aspect would be around mobility. How can we improvise this distinctiveness so that the interventions that we apply are not hard to replicate? Because the idea of pulling one set of climate information system into another is the fact that we can replicate. And I have heard the word scale when we talk about agricultural setting. That mechanistic trigger can work where settings are certain. Everybody knows when they expect the rains, and when the rains do not come, we can distribute this information, we can have direct support. But what happens for us to be able to reduce losses in contexts that are variable, in spaces where people do make decisions collectively, where local constructs of how we understand things are different from how they have been understood externally, and where there's a heavy hand externally and local ideas have not been put into practice. So I would add that one of the biggest barriers has been the framing. Then there's been understanding on the parameters that we need to apply. But even when we talk about co-creation, like Claire says, we would like to ask ourselves, how does this look in practice? There's big, huge conversation about integrating local indigenous ways of doing things with the scientific or conventional ones. And some people have questioned whether integration itself or how we engage in climate science comes on the framing that there is a more hierarchical way in which you look at these climate information systems. So even when we're looking about innovation and technology, I think there are intricate, locally embedded ways in which we need to look at what's happening locally versus what we are bringing from outside. Thank you.
Wow, I hope you are taking notes for the questions and comments for this excellent panelists. So this takes me to Samuel, especially bringing his expertise and operational perspective to this, and also drawing on what Claire and Rahma said, especially integrating indigenous and local knowledge in climate information services. Maybe could you highlight some of the successfully integrated indigenous knowledge and tailoring it to local context for climate information for pastoralists?
Thank you so much. From the pastoralist needs and anticipatory action, the truth is you cannot give out the information without identifying the needs. So as a KMD, we did the needs assessment for the community, that is the pastoralists and the agro-pastoralists. And we realized that what they want is the rainfall amount. They also want the cessation and the onset of the rains and the distribution. And of course, the distribution of rainfall usually informs the migration pattern. What we do is that these people have been having their system of forecast even before KMD, that is indigenous knowledge. And through working together with the Mercy Corps, we are currently implementing PSP, that is participatory scenario planning, whereby we have multi-sectoral approach to access the forecast, to plan using the forecast. And by doing that, we do co-produce, unlike initially where we produce climate information as KMD. Under integration, we bring in the aspect of co-production in the sense that we understand the indigenous part of the information and they are scientific, then we do our integration. And again, we co-explore the needs. Why must we have that PSP? It means that our forecast is being aligned towards a hazard. It means that this is to serve as an early warning system based on the activity within that livelihoods. And in this case, we are talking of pastoralists. Under PSP, we do evaluate the performance of the previous season. We do understand what the sectors ought to have done. We need to review what did not work well. And after that, based on the indicators, indigenous indicators, the local traditional knowledge people give us their side of the indicators using the stars. They use the animal behavior. They use the temperatures. They use the migration of birds and insects. They have a lot of indicators and they give us their scenario. What does those indicators mean? Is it aligned to above normal rainfall? Is it aligned to below normal rainfall? Or is it aligned to near normal rainfall? Then me as KMD, we issue scientific forecast. Then after that, we integrate, meaning that we value the forecast from the ITKs. But through integration, now we need to co-produce the advisories to work on as sectors. We don't produce for them. If KMD is talking of above normal and ITK's indicators are on near normal, then we build the two scenarios. What if we have above normal rainfall? What if we have near normal rainfall? For them, they know what above and near normal is. It is based on the long-term average. So, for them to get and use that information, all the sectors goes into their groups. We have agreed that we are going to receive above normal rainfall. As livestock sector, what should we do? Then, as livestock, they know very well that if they are going to receive below normal rainfall, we are going to have outbreak of diseases, and they know what they are going to do. We are going to have conflict, that is resource-based conflict, because we are not going to be having enough water and pasture. What they are going to do, they know. They know that we are going to have cases of malnutrition, and how to address it, they know. Then they seek for that advice. By the end of the day, we would have done co-production, we would have done the needs identification, we would have done co-delivery and packaging. It has been mentioned here that the packaging element has to be taken into account. The teams, the sectors will have to identify how to package their information and dissemination. And under the dissemination, we also did the appropriate channels based on the communities. We might be thinking that using TV is ideal. It can be ideal to one sector, but not to the other. We might tend to think that public baraza is ideal for dissemination. So we did that mapping, and we realized that the channels are different from one section to the other. So it is true that You identify the needs, and after identification of the needs, we have successfully applied participatory scenario planning to address most of the issues in terms of co-production, delivery, and monitoring. Thank you.
Excellent. You've heard about PSPP. Now I open the floor to the audience to ask questions. And also, in case you have any successfully integrated indigenous knowledge to climate information services, please do share with us.
I think I'm loud enough for the mic. So for something I just wanted, so you've mentioned the packaging of the information, right? So you've said you do it as KMD, and then there are these various sectors, the livestock, and I believe that it will also be different for the pastoralists and the one that are doing agro-pastoralists. So I just wanted to understand, so who in the long run will be responsible then for the dissemination of this information? I want a further explanation there around the packaging, how it's done, and how then the final information will be disseminated, for example, around the various sectors to their communities. Yeah.
Thank you, our speakers. My names are Joshua Adem. I wear two hats. I'm in the health sector, and I'm also in the climate change and environment. Now, when we talk of the pastoral community or the ASAL area, it is the historical. Ever since I was born, I was hearing there was a time people could not go there. But now people are moving and research are being done about this area. My first question will go to my brother here from the metro. I think the knowledge always we learn as we grow. This ASAL area, I think we are failing because we are not innovative enough. We have seen for a long time we have been using the dams as a source of water reservoirs. And the climate change now has made it worse. Have you ever thought of some innovative ways to reduce this issue we call ASAL? Because in the climate sector, we also involve the indigenous knowledge where you have mentioned. And in the ASAL area, have you ever thought of now coming up with the innovatives like we have what we call artificial forest? It is there. If you can make that one, what we call ASAL extension will reduce. And these areas will become like any other parts of the country where they can do irrigation, they can do planting and get some rain. On the side again, the dams we are using in this area, have you ever thought of now, because the water which has been collected in these dams, they dry faster again, people go back to those problems. Have you ever thought as a regulator of the climate on how can we now transform from the open dams to underground dams? This one also will impact the issues in these areas of ASAL. Coming back to the two ladies here, you are there with the community and you speak the language they understand. Mm-hmm. And from your research and your studies on the climate and the community around there, how do you involve them in the now we call green economy, whereby you bring the innovations within the agricultural sector, the AI, the DPI, which we have learned much of today, in the language that they understand, the indigenous language, the knowledge, whereby they understand you and they can practice what you are bringing on the table. So what part have you played to bring a change in those areas within your community, whereby the majority understands how to survive there, how to be self-reliant, how to be resilient during those times when it is dry or when the rain comes? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those presentations. My question also goes to Samuel. It's nothing technical. I live in Marsabit, and I come from a very remote village called Northor. And the only place I've found weather station in Marsabit County is Marsabit Town. And I really want to appreciate the meteorological department for the reliable information of late, in weather forecast and all this. And you could see pastoralists are really very keen about the information shared by meteorological department. Do you think you guys have got enough human resource capacity in the country to provide sufficient information for reliability?
Yes, thank you for the panelist. My name is John Torres. I come from Narok County, so I am also a pastoralist. And my question is about information, weather information, about maybe warning the communities, the concerned communities, the pastoralists, about drought or the rainy seasons. Now, how? Because now, for example, in those interior communities, the rural areas, the villages inside there in the counties, what criteria do you use to make sure that the information, that information gets to those people? Because, for example, in my village, I've never heard, or we've never been told about any warning about droughts or rainy seasons. So we just, those seasons just caught us abruptly. So it affects us a lot. So because the influential people there in the villages are the chiefs, the religious leaders, those community leaders. So is there any way the department, the meteorological department, are using those people to ensure that the right information reaches to the community? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll use the power of the facilitator to answer some questions because I am more a researcher than a facilitator. So forgive me. Yeah, so number one, I'll take the question from our colleague from Narok. I haven't done research in Narok, but in our county where I work and where I live, Marsabit and Isiolo, through the National Drought Management Authority, there are these community champions, like those people who are trained to disseminate climate information. So NDA may have these drought early bulletins that they published every, I think, monthly. So it is through these people that the information is disseminated. And also, through the community, we also have like radio stations whereby sometimes when the floods are coming, then there are those warnings. Of course, it is not sufficient, but then at least it is there. Maybe it needs a lot of strengthening and also capacity. And then I'll also respond to one question. Please forgive me. as I said earlier, I would like to respond to this, especially on the question on the drylands. Why are we not mechanizing it, making it so, like investable? I think one thing that we all, like many people, grapple with is dryland is ecologically dry, and the most productive livelihood is extensive animal production. That is livestock keeping, cattle, camel, and all these things. So there have been trials in early 1970s for highly mechanized agriculture, but unfortunately most of them failed because it cannot be sustained. And even if we have these large-scale dams, who will account for it? Yesterday we had a session on investment in the drylands, especially on financing risk. And many investors are afraid of investing because of how volatile and how variable the condition in the dryland is. So I think the best thing for the dryland is to support what activities and practices that are already existing. So pastoralism is very much viable in terms of contribution to nutrition, contribution to economy. So we have to invest on those practices that is viable in the dryland instead of just looking for changing that livelihood to mechanized agriculture, which to some extent is good to diversify the economy, but changing it is quite mechanistic and like might do more damage. So having said that, I'll now let my panelists, I know many questions were addressed to Samuel, but then I'll distribute it to our colleagues so that at least they also get a chance to contribute their excellent knowledge.
Yeah, I'm happy to just jump in from where Tahira has left. That's a very excellent observation from our colleague from Narok about the criteria applied and whether the information reaches the last mile. I think it's an interesting question because this is someone explaining from where they come from. So I'd like to place some doubts on whether this information reaches the farthest place it could possibly reach. And it is about conduits of early warning information. And it's something we are finding out in our study about access to information and the nature of the information. Because if you bring the bulletin and you've indicated all these lists of whether, what we could expect, there is doubt about the palatability of this information. Or maybe going back to Claire's point, what are people expecting in terms of climate information? One of the times someone told me, if you tell me there'll be no rain, please also go ahead and tell me what options I have. These differentiated needs. Some people will track their animals to Meru from Isiolo. Some people will sell off if they have means. Some people have diaspora remittance. Some people have nothing. And that is the central part of climate information in pastoral areas. And we're talking about networks and access to information. So your question is important, and I think it also links to emerging work about high reliability networks, different people that could be drawn into this work on passing early warning information alongside early action options. Because, giving people early warning information is one thing, but what are they supposed to do with that information? I think it should come hand in hand with, these are some scenarios. I like what Samuel was saying. These are some scenarios, and these scenarios involve what you could do. Because if you prescribe to people, they may not have the ability, especially where early action is not financed. And now I'm getting into anticipatory action politics of who funds these different type of actions. We can talk more about the conduits of early warning information maybe in the next session. But our friend who has a very nice dream for the green drylands has been answered by Tahira. But it is this dream that maybe we should also take with us to the fisher folk along Lake Turkana, to the agropastoralists who are along Wasonyiro, to also ask ourselves, which pastoral areas are we talking about? These are not homogeneous areas. The majority of the space is what Tahira has described, but there are pockets in there that they could feed the rest of the town areas. And they are bulging in urban centers in these areas that are growing with these mega projects that are unstoppable, that are also affecting their livelihood. So some people have also said, okay, let's pay attention to these livelihood profiles, which are small pockets within the drylands, and ask ourselves, how do they support the major livelihood, which is pastoralism? At the same time, how can we pay attention to how these different emerging, pastoralism on transition? There are many spaces that are pastoralism on transition, like along the Isiolo Highway, there are pastoralists who are on transition. Some people say they are M-Pesa pastoralists, like someone here. They send money to, to send to the herder. So just on a light note to say, it's a challenge for us to think about the profiles of these areas, but also focus on that this has failed before, so what works? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mine is just a continuation of what my fellow panelists have mentioned. The only thing we have to acknowledge is that all the counties are unique in their own ways and their own structures and their own supports. The first issue was on the person responsible for dissemination. As I had mentioned, that PSP is a multi-sectoral approach. Pastoralists have their own system and their own structure. They have their mode of communication. One of them must attend PSP. We have farm groups. They have farm leaders. Their farm leaders must be invited to PSP. At the same time, we have intermediaries within the communities. These intermediaries are part of the ITKs. They get the information from PSP and take back to their people in terms of dissemination. That's number one. The second thing, we have advisories developed during PSP for the sectors. If you are talking of agro-pastoralism advisories, if you are talking of pastoralist advisories, we have extension officers. These extension officers are supposed to be going back with this information to their offices and disseminating, either through the chief's baraza, as somebody has mentioned, that only the chiefs talk to them. This person should be given that opportunity to give out the advisories based on the users. Secondly, there was an issue of innovation from Joshua. It's true, it's good if you can have artificial forests. But again, when it comes to management of the dams, we can only control the size and the depth based on the rainfall amount and surface runoff. But you cannot eradicate it totally, because it will make us go towards cloud seeding, which is very expensive. On the line of innovations, we have been having climate smart agriculture ongoing. We have been having livestock improved breeds, which is ongoing. But as my panelist has mentioned, we are going to touch more on them as we move on. Marsabit has one station at the town that is a fully synoptic station. We have different types of stations. We can have synoptic stations which observes all the elements. We can have the rainfall stations placed within particular areas with volunteer monitors who records and gives the information to the office. So by then, it's easier to know which areas have received good rainfall, which areas have not received, and come up with the climatological mean. So in terms of capacity, we are embracing that element of co-monitoring. The co-monitoring is that we use community members to monitor the rain gauges. And during PSP, if somebody asks me about the amount of rainfall received in a particular area, I'll point at that person. Can you give us that information? So it also builds up the self-esteem of that particular person. So as KMD, we might not be having enough personnel, but in the spirit of co-production and working together with the communities, we are getting enough data as required. I think basically that's what I can mention. In terms of committees, we have mentioned the issue of bulletin. Within the communities, I'm not sure whether to all. We have community managed disaster risk reduction committees, CMDRR. Initially, they used to be DRR, but the government was somehow pushing a lot of interventions which were not community driven. So these people can also disseminate the same information. We have rangeland management committees in pastoralist areas. These are the people who control the rangeland zones. They determine the migration routes, and they demarcate areas which are to be reserved. So those people can also be used to issue information, and they also regulate the water use through water users. We also have the peace committees. within our own areas. Though I've said I'm not sure whether it is to all, but if it is not there, I know you are the key people now to demand for them to be there. And again, I know there are some counties which do not have the support like the others. So there is that diversification in terms of access to climate information. Some knows the information is there and they have the task to get it. Some do not even know that it exists. Some are not sure of what they want. So unless you do needs assessment, you cannot easily know what to give. You can have advised, you have a lot of information to give, but not relevant to the person you are giving. I think basically those are the things I needed to add. And you can use the chiefs, you can use the religious leaders to give out the same information.
Yeah, thank you, Samuel. I know I've been informed that by 6 p.m. we should be back to the plenary, so we'll try to be as short as possible, but then I'll ask Claire a question because I think most of the questions have been answered. So thank you very much, our panelists, and also our audience for asking those questions. So my question to Claire is, we know the dryland is heterogeneous and also differentiated by spatial geographies, gender dynamics, wealth, and all this. From my PhD research, I looked at the longitudinal evolution of livelihoods in the drylands, especially in a very remote area and urban connected, the M-Pesa pastoralists that Rahma mentioned, or highway pastoralists. And these differentiated pastoralists had very different needs. So, Claire, what are some of the climate information needs, especially for women in pastoral area?
Okay, thank you, Tahira. I think it's a really important aspect that came out of the research that SPARC did was on the women's needs for climate information services and how information got to them. So women will have different needs, priorities according to their livelihood roles, their constraints, and their decision-making ability. So in pastoral communities, roles are gendered as well as adaptation strategies. So this needs to be taken in consideration of the kinds of climate and weather information that they might need. So for example, if women have more control of the domestic sphere at home or over water collection, they might be interested in getting information about water availability in different places or information on food security. Whereas if men are in primary responsible for livestock management, then they'll want more information on areas to graze, livestock prices and markets. So it's thinking about these differentiated needs, but also recognizing that in pastoral society, roles are always evolving, so they're dynamic and they're changing. And there are lots of examples where women are getting increasing decision-making power and ability. So that means the climate needs, information needs will also need to evolve with them. One of the things we found was about there are specific gender barriers as well, which make it difficult for women compared to men to perhaps access climate information, access and use it. So for example, things like lower mobile phone ownership, less access to perhaps different communication channels or different forum for meeting and discussing things. Although different channels, there'll also be different channels. And maybe also less power and agency in using making decisions and using resources, so not having that authority to perhaps act on the information. So there were some gender barriers. So I think this means that there needs to be a good understanding of the different gendered context when perhaps trying to tailor the information for men and for women, not only focusing on women, but making sure that both men and women are included in that designing and delivering of the information to them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me ask a question. How many people know that this year, 2024, is the International Year of Camelids? Okay, at least three people know that. So like many people out of the room, only 3 people know that. And then how many people know that Dryland is like always in humanitarian crisis? So you hear drought appeals and national disaster declaration. Like almost everyone knows about that, Drylands, right? Okay. So now this brings me to Rahma, especially everyone knows Dryland as an area that is affected by crisis after crisis, floods, conflict, and things like that. Throughout history, there has been, transformation of how this disaster is managed, especially through humanitarian actions, resilience building, and these days through anticipatory early action. And within this anticipatory early action, early warning information is very important. And more importantly, more harmonized triggers and thresholds. Because if they are not harmonized, then like you have different and complexities within the dryland. So Rahma, how can climate information services especially account for slow onset and multifaceted hazards, considering the uncertainties and complexities in dryland? Because for anticipatory action, the triggers has to be focused on one hazard. But as we've been talking about, dryland is very much complex. So how can we prepare for that? And what is the role of climate information services to account for that diverse complexities and crises in the dryland?
Thank you, Tahira. I'll go as general as we can. I think we are also sharing some of the emerging research and evidence that maybe people in the room would be interested to pursue after this. And it's part of the synthesis report we've just written called Under One Tree. So you can just search Under One Tree, Fenstein International Center, where we are looking at how can we account for the differences based on all this research that, as he said, there's huge research going on in this area. But as Tahira says, we have to also think about climate information or early warning that is for a daily decision making. And I think that is the pastoralist life. So there is the daily decision making, there is the prediction. It is okay, we can plan for the coming days, but every day I make a decision. And thank you for pointing to the disaster narratives, because in the recent work at the Center for Research and Development in the Drylands, we are looking at local constructs of how people understand their daily decision making and how early warning information is understood. You can also say construed, how even people interpret this information on their own. So minus the external intervention, how does it work in practice? And how can we embed this climate information on an existing structure that goes as far as the people you mentioned? So looking at those constructs of conduits of early warning information, one of the emerging this is now academic, but I'll just say it's a theoretical node of high reliability networks, that within pastoral communities exist people who people rely on for information. They trust them, they are there with them throughout, and they are a missing link for external interventions and the work that we do with climate information. For example, if there is a local person who can read intestines and also has a connection with the county and listens to the radio, they have multiple sources of information. So the point is not so much which set of information you get to people. It's whether you offer them a space to deliberate the different sources of information. So this deliberating is what I think Claire was referring to as co-creating. So Kenya Met has sent out a bulletin. The intestine reader has said things are going to be difficult in the next 5 years. We just see doom and gloom in this tribe, in these intestines. Or we see a future full bomber. They will say things like those. So this information sometimes is not very precise. And I do not think the point is whether the information is correct or precise, but rather whether we get the opportunity to deliberate together. And I think the chance to deliberate early warning information gives the opportunity for people to explore their options. Again, we are talking about the prescriptions are not needed. Give people information, bring everybody on board under one tree, like we say in our report, and then let people deliberate, agree to disagree. The point is not so much to have one voice, but to deliberate on multiple options, because uncertainty is not a bad thing. If you can't predict, it's not a bad thing. And drylands are just inherently uncertain. So you can't come to force predictions on a system which on its own is working through these uncertainties. So I think that's just what I'd like to add as a takeaway from me about how we need to think differently when we're working in the drylands and pay attention to locally embedded resources and networks, high reliability networks, groups of people who are working every day to share this information on phone. And there's also a saying that whenever a pastoralist calls another or meets another on the street, the first is, how are you? And then get the climate information. I think you would say the same about other areas where people rely on rain. So that is a conduit of early warning information that we are missing in the room, I think. Thank you.
Wow, I hope you are filling your toolbox with all these words. Yeah, thank you so much, Rahma, for that. I'll now go to Samuel, and then I'll open the floor for Q&A, so please bear with me. Samuel, we've mentioned quite a number of barriers, especially infrastructure, connectivity, language barriers. And then we also have the digitalization of climate service information. So how might digital services be embedded with other channels to most effectively reach pastoralists? Can you also give brief examples? For instance, I can start by ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute, through a program called CASNet, whereby combining citizen science to collect crowdsource information, including food security, like animal condition, market system, and things like that. Because just adding to what Rahma said, in dryland, we don't need one particular information. It is so much complex, and it is connected to one another. So market, security, water condition, and things like that. So how can that digitalization be embedded, Samuel?
Thank you so much. I know you have only mentioned one, that is CASNet. But under digital services, I know we are fond of using SMS, that is digital. All of us have WhatsApp, that is digital. We use radio, we use TV, that is digital. But in line with the pastoralism, we have AfriScout. AfriScout is an app which can be used on a mobile phone, and it's being used by the pastoralists to monitor pasture and water. And this app has really assisted in diverting conflict, that is resource-based, and with a lot of other issues. Then we also have My Anger. My Anger has climate data from satellite, merging it with station data, and that is what we call CHAPS data. This CHAPS data can easily be analyzed by my app and gives you the rainfall distribution and pattern within that particular area. Then in terms of embedding, we already done the communication channel mapping. It is always better that we merge these other channels with the digital services, so that all these actors, all these pastoralists can easily access the information. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We are still being advised to get to Mara room, but I think we will take one question from there because we've not had a chance from a sister, so I'm being gender sensitive here.
Thank you. My name is Charlene from Farmerline, and I have a question in regards to the digitization of information dissemination to the pastoralist communities. So I'll go straight to what has just been mentioned in terms of you have a mobile app that the pastoralist use. So my question is on the terms of, is this an offline, does it have an offline functionality? Because I would assume the pastoralist communities are unable to access Wi-Fi. And there was also an issue of timely information sharing and interpretation of information. So how are you leveraging on technology to ensure that the pastoralists are able to interpret the information, as well as how are you leveraging on the village-based advisors, the VBAs, for them to ensure that they have wealth information to be able to share with the farmers? That's my question. Thank you.
Can I ask a related question? Okay, sorry. I mean, it's kind of related, but just in connection with all of what you've mentioned in terms of like the complexity and heterogeneity and needing context-specific approaches, which to some extent digital solutions can provide, but to some extent they're also more of a blanket, like that they provide just generalized solutions, for example, that are then accessible, which can be locally interpreted. But my question is, what does this mean for scaling climate information services, and what kind of trade-offs do you see with, what would that look like trying to scale up these approaches?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. My name is Peter Olo from KMD. So Sam sitting there is my colleague. I work at the headquarters. But I wanted to mention that within KMD, we also have the training college where I work. So for those who are interested in terms, just to follow up in terms of what my brother is talking about, you want to be capacitated in terms of climate information, in terms of digital services, as per meteorology, I'm here. Thank you.
Sorry, on which one? The first or the one on the second one? Yes, so I think there are challenges to scaling up, especially in the drylands as everywhere else. So you see some innovations, they come and they go quite quickly. Maybe we actually had a conversation in the group work about the scaling, and there were lots of points were raised about making sure that you had champions again that could go out there, and sustainable financial models, which is also difficult in the drylands. Maybe just one contribution is on possibilities of bundling the services. So as well as providing the climate information, people are also getting access to other services which may be beneficial for their livelihoods. And so then there's some incentive or willingness to pay for that service, or for it to be sustained in another way. Because one of the challenges is often you may not be able to act on the climate information that you receive. So by bundling it, perhaps there's opportunities for people to get that access to finance, or that access to inputs that then can feed back into the scaling and the sustainability of the information.
Thank you so much, Claire. And Samuel will take on digitization and
I can see it's coming to the end when it's becoming more interesting, because when you're getting more questions is when you realize that there's a lot of activities going on outside there. Now the question is digitization, is it offline? When I talked of my anger, just anger, not hunger, anger. Not asira. ANG na hiyo ingine. So the AfriScout is you just go download it and you are on. You check on the county you are interested on. Then you'll know the position of the monitors. You will even get their names, and you'll get the status of pasture and water. With
interpretation of the information being received, AfriScout was developed through the consultation of pastoralists. So they have their structure, they know how they want to communicate their information, and they were capacity built. And I'm happy to hear that, to learn that we have a lot of organizations who are still willing to support. What we need to do is just to identify the organization. We present our issues to them, and I'm sure they are really willing to support so that we can avoid what we can call marginalization. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's request for one question. I don't know. That's why I'm not a facilitator, because I would.
It's not even a question. I just felt like the guy who asked about Narok. I just wanted to mention that in all the counties, we have what you call county directors of meteorological services, and my brother here is representing Garissa. So please get in touch with me so that I can connect you with the county director of Narok County. And to all of you, we are having county directors of meteorological services across all the 47 counties. So if you want that forecast for your specific county, please get in touch with us. We connect you to the respective county directors of meteorological services. Thank you so much.
I'm going to steal it too. I'm going to add on. He was mentioning an app called AfriScout, and just to give a plug, SPARC is currently doing an evaluation of the app. The final round of data collection is starting soon, so you can look around maybe July, August next year for those final reports.
Excellent. Thank you very much, our dear audience. I know I would love to give the chance to you, but then unfortunately, I think even the recorders, the people who are recording would also want to go to that session. Thank you very much. Even our panelists will not have an opportunity to say final words, but they'll tell you as you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Tahira. Excellent facilitation.